Welcome to Hear God Every Day. I'm your host, Sarah Whitten. Get comfortable, open your heart, and let's talk about how we can be more sensitive to God's voice in our everyday life. Welcome to episode 1 of Hear God Every Day. So, I assume you're here because hearing God is your core desire, that you're wanting to hear Him with a level of greater clarity than you've ever heard Him before. And you're in good company because I feel like while we may not know each other, we share that core desire. And after this podcast, you're going to know me a lot better. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I recognize that you could literally be doing anything with your time, but you're choosing to invest it here. And, I feel like the Lord has given me a commission to ensure you get a return on that investment of time. And so I'm telling you now that God is going to multiply the time that you're investing into wanting to know how to hear Him more deeply, and He'll multiply that back to you. Before we get started, I'm just going to pray for us. So, Lord, thank you so much just for spanning distances and being a God who speaks through amazing, unconventional, incredible ways. And Lord, I just surrender this time to you. I ask that your will be done, that this be your show and your time, and that this be a time of deep healing and connection and breakthrough. We know that you know better than any of us what it is that we need, what it is that we are being prepared for. And so, Lord, we just ask for the release of that next level, that next step. And we ask for tangible, visible fruits from the investment of this time with you. So it's in your precious and holy name we pray. Amen. So, as I was praying into this podcast, I got 2 words. So, words from the Lord. These are not my words. And the first is that through this, God is wanting to heal ears. Now, I'm not thinking physical ears, although if God heals your ears through listening to this podcast, please call me. I would love to hear that. Let me know. But I'm thinking spiritual ears. And the picture that I got was God was very specific about this not being a time where I'm just talking to you and telling you what I'm hearing from Him. Because while that is of some value, what's so much more important is connecting you in a more powerful way directly to the source so that these little teeny tiny or sometimes huge things that we're not even aware of that are impeding our spiritual healing in hearing are able to be instantaneously touched by the healer. And so I just see this as a time when God is going to heal spiritual ears and speak things in a way that I myself never could. So this time is really about you and the Lord. Second word I got was casting down evil imaginations. Okay, casting down evil imaginations, especially in this day and age. I feel like that is such a powerful, powerful word because I don't know about you, but oftentimes my imaginations about what is going to happen in the world, what is going to happen to me, what God is thinking, what God has planned, any of those things, my imaginations are not always good and they're not always accurate. And evil loves to root in our imagination because it affects and filters literally everything we do. So our faith is driven by action. So I'm not talking about works-based types of things, but I'm more referring to how faith without works is dead. God knows that every time He has a calling, every time He has a commissioning, every time He asks us to step out in faith, it requires some sort of action. And that action is a behavior. And the enemy knows if he can get into our minds and filter those thoughts so that we don't act in that way or we don't, make that step, that he can cost us at minimum time, but sometimes totally derail us. So we are going straight to the root of those evil imaginations, and we're casting them out today. And that is not my promise to you, that's the Lord's promise to you. So we know that his promises are good. You can hold him to it. You are not going to leave this empty-handed. This podcast specifically is for those individuals who are stepping into a new anointing, stepping into a new level of their calling. It is this invitation, I feel, to level up. And so whether you have found this podcast, been sent this podcast, however you stumbled upon it, I just want you to take this, that the fact that you're listening right now, as an invitation that God has more for you. Okay, so you are responding to a heavenly invitation that has already gone out, and this is intended for you, and it's going to have those bits and pieces for your breakthrough. So when I when I first was thinking about hear God every day, because I knew that's what the Lord wanted this show to be about. I mean, where do you start? Many of you have been hearing the Lord for years. You have really established walks with Him, but still, when you're talking about hearing the Lord, I had scribbled, so I had got my journal out. I'd scribbled a big chart, kind of jotted down all these different, skills we could talk about and equippings and just hindrances to hearing. And we're going to cover a lot, but I had no idea where to start. What is that ground floor foundational truth number one when it comes to hearing the Lord? And I was stuck. And I had one of those moments, and I think many of you have had these too, where you wake up in the middle of the night. For me, it was like 1 a.m, and you cannot go back to sleep. And you just have this thought that is going through your mind over and over and over again. Now, when it's a good thought, it's the Lord. When it's not a good thought, that is not God. But for me, I just kept getting this line over and over and over again, and I could not go back to sleep until I literally grabbed my phone, opened the notes section, jotted a memo, and that memo said, knowing God's heart, calling, healing, clarification, course correction. I wrote down, was instantly able to fall asleep. And the amazing part about that is, as soon as I got that download, I thought, oh my gosh, that's great. I mean, of course it's great. It's God. God definitely knows what He's doing way more than I do. But you cannot hear God clearly if there are any kind of filters or misperceptions or little weeds that creep into how well you know His heart. Knowing His heart is at the very core of hearing Him. And the deeper we can know His heart, and the deeper we can kind of refine what we know about His heart and take care of any misperceptions that we have in those areas, the deeper that we can begin to hear from Him. And so I hate the phrase knowing God's heart. It just sounds so cliche, so abstract. Like it's just this great goal, but it's so hard to break down into manageable little pieces. But really, I think this is going to get the message across of what I mean by knowing God's heart. It's not this overall, is God good? Well, yes, we're all going to say God's good. It's more questions like, does God plan for bad or difficult things to happen to us? Are you dispensable or replaceable to God? Does God require certain things from you? And if so, what? Does God keep you safe? Does God change His mind? So like some of you, you're already kind of thinking about these questions and for certain questions, it's like this instant, very objective, clear response. And then other ones for us, just based on our history or based on, different things we've been through or walked through with the Lord, it's a little bit more complicated. And as you're thinking about questions like that, that's when you really get to, what do I know about the Lord's heart? And there may be some questions like that your answer is, I don't know. And even that tells you something. And so I encourage you, even if you just heard one of those questions, or, if there's ones that just kind of come up in your day and it just kind of hits and you're thinking, I don't know, or your answer really isn't the answer that you thought you'd have, or that you think you should have. I just want you to stop and just like take that to the Lord and say, all right, God, show me what this is. Take me deeper, because I feel like those are invitations to knowing his heart more deeply. And so you can jot those down, save them for your God time later. Honestly, everything in this show it's going to be great, but the meat is going to be when you take what you hear here and bring it to your quiet time with the Lord. Because in the secret place, when God is able to speak to you about these things, that's when you're going to get the meat. And that's when you're going to get the breakthrough. It's not going to be something that I say. It's going to be something that you get from here and take to the Lord. And that's where the breakthrough comes. So take those to God in your quiet time later. So as you're exploring these answers, or even lack thereof answers, when you're, going through questions about what God's like, I want to say something pretty profound. Your perception of God's heart does not change God's heart. That was really good. So I'm going to say it again. Your perception of God's heart does not change God's heart. So just sharing with you, I used to really struggle with legalism and having to earn everything. And, if I did not do everything correctly, then somehow, God was just really low key mad at me. And I really struggled with that mindset for a while. And I am so thankful that during that time, the fact that I perceived God as keeping score, or perceived God as a legalist or perfectionist, did not make him one. And so I want to encourage you, any kind of misperceptions or even little tweaks on the filters through which you see God, whatever they may be, they do not change God's character, and thank God for that. But what they do change is what we hear. What we know about God directly affects what we're hearing from him. Okay, so why do we need to know God's heart to hear his voice? Why is this the foundational thing? I'm going to use an example that I think we all can relate to, unfortunately. Think about the last time that you had a text message miscommunication. And I'm talking about those text messages you get that are like, let's talk when you get a chance about something really important. Oh, I hate those texts. I don't know if you do, but when you get something like that, do you instantly think, oh, it's something good? Do you think, oh gosh, what could it be? Like, is it something bad? Do you think that that person needs your help? Are you thinking like, oh gosh, what is this person signing me up for? Do you assume that they're going to confide in you about some really important thing that's going on with them? Do you assume that they have an opportunity for you? Maybe it's somebody who works for somebody who, maybe you're kind of related in that field. And so maybe they could have some sort of opportunity for you. I don't know. But what I do know is everything that you believe and know about that person through your filters, because, may or may not be true, but your perception of that person has 100% to do with how internally you react and respond to that message, and also how externally you react and respond to that message. Okay. So when you're processing this, and this text is coming from this person, but let's talk when you get a chance about something really important, super vague text. Do you trust this person? Is this somebody you trust? Is this somebody who is easily angered? Are you thinking, oh no, maybe I upset them or offended them again? Are they easily offended? Are they someone who's self-centered, or are they somebody who builds you up? What activities are they involved in? That may kind of give you clues to what this message could be about. What people are they connected with? All of these things kind of build our perception. And I'm gonna take this a level deeper. This may like step on some toes, but it's gonna be so good, guys. So imagine you get the same message from God. Okay. You get a message that says, let's talk when you get a chance about something really important from God. Okay. Let's go through those same questions. Do you assume it's good? Do you assume it's bad? Ooh. Do you assume that God needs your help with something? Do you assume that God is confiding in you and going to reveal some sort of secret or revelation to you? Do you assume that God has an opportunity he wants to tell you about? All of that has to do with how you perceive God and his character. So, using those same questions that we talked about for people, do you trust God? Oh, that's that gut punch because you want to give that pat yes, but do you trust God? Do you see God as somebody who's easily angered? Do you think he might be mad at you again? Do you see God as kingdom centered? Let's put it that way, where all he cares about is, getting his mission and vision accomplished and, does not really take into account your individual situation. He's just focused on his God stuff. Or is God somebody in your mind that is wanting to build you up? What activities do you see God as involved in? That's a big one. Do you see God as the God of untimely deaths or the God of miracles or the God of um, inconsistency or the God of vengeance? The activities and the day-to-day happenings that we see God connected with are so huge. And that's a question. I mean, I'm not going to talk about all these answers in this podcast, but what I want to know is your answers. What people is God connected to? Okay. Oftentimes, the people that we think of when we think of, man, these people are really connected to God, they're going to tell you a lot about what you think about the character of God. So start thinking about those people who you really feel like reflect his nature. What are they like? What does that tell you about the Lord or about what kind of characteristics you tend to gravitate towards in the ways that you view the Lord? This is getting deep, right? This is good. So why does all of that matter? Why do our little, maybe slight tweaks or, imperfections or hiccups in the way we see God's heart, how does that affect our hearing so drastically? I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share a little personal example. Back in July, I had an interesting week. Our AC was out for the 7th week in a row, and it felt like ramming your head into a brick wall. It was like every single time we would reach out and contact the company, the first couple of times they'd answer, then they'd come out and they couldn't fix it. And, then they'd come out again and couldn't fix it. And then after a while, they stopped picking up our phone calls and just stopped responding completely. And I felt so just like nobody cared. And I would watch, our baby sleep just sweating in her 82-degree room, and just feel like I can't, I just feel helpless. And then on top of that, that day I had asked my son to do a few extra chores around the house, pick up some things, and he had totally just forgotten, already gone to sleep. So here I am, it's late at night, it's hot. My son's asleep, hasn't done his stuff. And I'm literally sitting on the couch crying to my husband because he didn't upload this important scheduling information to our youth website. And clearly my reaction, like sobbing and being so upset about this, did not match. My husband's super busy, like he's got a full plate. It's not like he was not paying attention to this. But through tears, I'm telling him like, it's just so frustrating. I feel like if I want anything done, I have to do it myself. Nobody cares, and just kind of pouring it out. And then I felt this just whisper from God. And God's like, do you really think that? Do I not take care of you? Or is my taking care of you kind of like a DIY thing where, you have to assemble it yourself? And it was just like, oh, wow. Okay, God. And so that was a little thing of me feeling like I had to be either a super, super active component of making things happen or just completely responsible for making things happen. But imagine how that could have affected my hearing. So imagine if I had gotten a word and, God was kind of revealing a calling that he had for me, right? And he has this whole behind the scenes, step by step path laid out of how he's going to get me there. But God often doesn't give us that. But he gave me this glimpse of this calling. Imagine I still had that misperception of God not taking care of me having to do it myself. Imagine if I had still had that intact and I got that vision of this calling. My immediate response would have been, okay, great. I know where we're going. I need to figure out how to get there and how to make it happen so that I can make what God said come true. And we know that's not right. God partners with us, but God doesn't have us do it all. In fact, I probably would mess up his plans, or at least, make it more trouble for him in trying to implement my own. Or another example, okay? So if I had gotten a word that just said, rest, I'll take care of you from the Lord. If that did not match that belief of mine, that I had to do it myself belief, I may have discarded that as just a temptation from the enemy. The enemy is trying to tempt me to rest, but I just got to power through. I got to do this. And then empowering through, I'm ignoring the Sabbath. I'm not following God's commands. I'm not resting. Like it's huge. It's huge, huge, guys. So knowing God's heart may seem like this little kind of pat side detail, but really that is the foundation of hearing God more clearly. So let's flip this a little, all right? We talked about knowing the heart behind the voice. Now we're going to talk about knowing the voice behind the heart. Okay? So we're going to go text message example again. Imagine you get a text message. It's from an unknown number, but this text is from your spouse. Or if you're not married, it's from your best friend or your parent or your child or somebody who knows you very well, who has known you for a very long time. So when you get a message from somebody like that, let's say they got a new number or something, you don't even have to ask, who is this? Or, it doesn't take you a lot of time to figure it out. And I think knowing God's heart is the same in that we get messages all the time. And the quicker we're able to be like, oh, I know who that message is from, the quicker we're able to respond accordingly. Because, at least if you're doing it right, the way you respond to a message, if you know it's from the Lord versus if you think a message is from the enemy or from, your own mind or from somebody else, they should be radically different responses. And so a lot of times the enemy will keep us kind of locked or paralyzed in this indecision just because we don't know if this message is a message from God. So knowing the voice behind the heart. If my dad sent me that text, so get a text from an unknown number that's from my dad, I can tell you exactly what it would say. Okay. It would say B-E-E, because that's what he has called me since I was a little girl. All caps, because, he typically writes like that, period. Call me when you get a chance, period. That 100% is my dad. I would not have to text back and say, hey, who is this? There'd be no debating time. I know that's my dad. If I read that text to my husband would laugh and say, yep, that's your dad. That sounds just like your dad. And there's this familiarity when we know the voice behind the heart, where it's just like, oh, that's God. And then when you're telling those other people who you have in your life, who you know have that real rapport of walking with and hearing the Lord, and they can be those sources of confirmation for you. They're saying, yes, that sounds like God, when you're giving them what you're hearing. So what are those things? Like, how do we know who a message is from just by what it says? So we're going to break that down into 3 pieces, okay? First, what do they call you, right? In the example with my dad, I talked about him calling me B, but what does God call you? God calls you something. God calls you more than likely several things. Have you ever asked or thought of what God calls you? So maybe God calls you a writer. But if you don't know that God calls you a writer, then the enemy can come in and say, a writer? No, you work as an accountant. What are you talking about, a writer? You've never published anything. You're not a writer. What are you doing? You're getting off of the rails. That is not God's calling for you. You're not a writer. But if God calls you a writer and you know God calls you a writer, then that changes everything. You know how to perceive those messages in a different way. I had a friend who God really related to them through Peter. He called that person Peter, just in their spirit. Maybe you have a similar thing. There's some kind of biblical connection where, God really has closely, knit your heart with that. And you know that God kind of speaks to you through that. Well, when you think of Peter, what do you think of? You think of a good friend of Jesus. You think of an apostle. You think of just all of these different layers, the foundation of the church, a leader. So all of those different layers are just kind of these sweet nods from God at who he created you to be. Another thing God calls you, maybe your name. Like, that's very, very basic, but there's so much meaning oftentimes in people's names. Sometimes names have more, obvious meanings than others. Like my poor sister-in-law, her name is Brittany, and it means like from land of the Britons or something. So she's always like, woo, awesome. But if you have a name like that, it does not mean that there is less of a meaning in your name, or that there's not as much, prophetic richness to be dug up. It just may take a little bit more digging, but your name ultimately is a promise. And actually, if you are looking for a good resource on names, I have this book that's like my absolute favorite. It's called The Name Book, and it is by Dorothy Astoria. Okay. And so it lists names, inherent meanings, spiritual meanings. It has scripture for every name. I really enjoy it. If you enjoy looking up a lot of names, like my husband and I have a youth group, it's really, really great for that. Or if you just want to know, what it says about your name, you can absolutely go to my website, arrowsofzion.com, hit the contact button, just email me and say, Sarah, hey, what does your book say for my name? Not that this book is the end all be all authority on name meanings, but it has some really cool biblically based things. So if you reach out to me, it may take me a little bit to sift through emails, writing, recording, chasing a 2-year-old, all these things going on, but I will get back to you because your name is important. But yes, all that to say, pray into your name. So what does he call you? Second thing is, what does he say often to you? Okay, I have a friend that sees hearts in everything. There will be little hearts in her coffee or in rocks or, everywhere. They'll just pop up. And she knows when she sees a heart, it's like a specific little wink from God. There may be things that God says or does every now and then that are his little winks to you. And those are just for you. So you will know those better than I could ever, say, oh, this is what to look for, step A, B, C, D. You will know because those things will be recurrent. And, if it's something that you're looking to learn more about, just pray and ask God, hey, open my eyes to those things that you kind of say to me repeatedly, or really those symbols um that you're putting in my life over and over again, that you're speaking through, and God will be faithful to answer that prayer. The next one, what does God sound like? Okay. Um, you know, the Bible is full of what God sounds like. I think he says, don't be afraid over 300 times in the Bible. So there are certain things that just sound like God. In the same way that if you got a text message from an unknown number and it said, those certain phrases, you'd be like, huh, that sounds like God. Just like I was, oh, that sounds like my dad. So knowing what God sounds like has so much to do with knowing what his word sounds like. Diving into the word, diving into the Bible. There's a reason he gave it to us. It wasn't supposed to be the end of what he spoke to us because he wants to speak to us each individually. It was supposed to be almost like our guide to know, hey, this is real, this is counterfeit. This is what I sound like, this is what I'm like. It's an incredible tool. And the more time you spend in the Bible, the more you'll be able to hear him outside of the Bible. So all that to say, that is a lot to cover for this week. You have a lot of fuel to take back to the Father. And I hope that you will. I hope that, some of these things of, your perceptions of God, what he calls you, what he says to you often, what he sounds like, that these are things that you will take time with the Lord in prayer to really dive into. Because like I said, that's really where you're going to get the meat, is when he speaks to you directly about these things. But I can tell you that until you explore each of these with him, there's only so much hearing God that you can do without fully exploring and knowing his heart. And so as you pray through this, first I want to say, have grace for yourself. When you find those imperfect perceptions, or, things that you're like, oh, I didn't really realize that I didn't fully trust God, or whatever the case may be, having grace and knowing that God is not illuminating that thing to shame you. God's illuminating that thing because he's saying, hey, I'm calling you up to a clearer level of hearing. And for that level of hearing, you're going to need to know that this is not true. So see it for what it is, as just part of that process, that it is, we are all in this process together. We are all on the journey of hearing God better every day. That's why we're here. And, it doesn't have to be a perfect first shot. And that word perfect actually is kind of sweet to me. So I just finished writing a book and it's in publishing right now. And I'll give you a little sneak peek. One of the tidbits from it is exploring that word perfect, because Matthew 5:48, be perfect because I am perfect. We read that verse and we think, oh, I got to have it all together. But the word perfect in there is actually Strong's 5046 is the Strong's number, and it's teleos. It's a Greek word, and it means reaching the end aim. And it's literally illustrated by a Pirate's telescope, like the kind that just unfolds. So a Pirate's telescope that's unfolding and extending one stage at a time to function in full strength, full clarity, and full effectiveness. Wow. I'm going to say that one more time. So this is what this process is, you guys. As we are refining our ability of knowing God's heart and hearing his voice, we are that telescope that is reaching the end aim by unfolding or extending one stage at a time to function in full strength, full capacity, and full effectiveness, because we are all on this journey towards maturity. Maturity is just growth. And I think we can all agree that growth is way easier to say, yes, I'm doing that, than perfection. So I pray that as you're praying through this, that growth would be your goal and not perfection. And then next week, I want to give you a little teaser. So I mentioned in my phone that 1 a.m. note that God woke me up with about hearing God's heart. But then the second piece of that, where I had written down the calling, healing, clarification, course correction, that is what we're going to talk about next week. And I'm so excited about it. Next week is going to be called God Speaks for 3 Reasons. And it's talking about when God speaks, when you hear something, what reasons should you be looking for behind why God is speaking to you and what God is saying. So, kind of that deeper call to action. And so looking at, that God comes with a calling, a healing, a clarification, or a course correction. So you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be great. Until then, I will be praying for you guys. I ask just humbly that you keep me in your prayers. Pray that, everything that God has me put my hands to, that his will would be done and that he would come through. And that includes this podcast. Because really, guys, I have nothing to offer you aside from him. And so my prayer is just to be a vessel week after week. And thanks so much again for spending time with us today. I will see you next week. Thanks for spending time with me today. If God spoke to you through this time, visit arrowsofzion.com for writings, resources, and ways to partner with me in reaching the unreached with the gospel. You can also find Arrows of Zion on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Have a blessed day, and let's meet here next week.